Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Tillett, President-elect of the City Club. Welcome to another forward-looking City Club program. Today we focus on early childhood education with our guest Dr. Sharon Kagan, who's Senior Research Scientist with the Yale University Child Study Center, a timely successor to the Governor's speech to us of a couple of weeks ago. Today's program is co-sponsored by Portland Early Childhood Care and Education Council. Our thanks go to United Way and Bank of America for making Dr. Kagan's appearance here today possible. First, some announcements about the membership drive. As you know, our membership drive is well underway and will remain so until the end of March, thanks to City Club members who've recruited the following new members this week. Greg McPherson has introduced Beverly Pearman and Anne Gravett. Chris Angel has introduced Richard Angel. Oliver Messingale has introduced George Doolittle. Gary Blackmer has introduced Sharon Meras and Scott Stewart. Kristen Green has introduced Matthew Udsler. Charlie Hinkle has introduced William Hinkle. Kurt Wabring has introduced Clement Lausberg. John Leeper has introduced Walt Gorman. Harriet Watson has introduced Mark Sherman. A gratifyingly long list. Many thanks to all of you. Now, for new members who are present today and interested in attending, there'll be a brief new member orientation session immediately after lunch. And if you assemble at the back of the room afterwards, some board members and staff will meet you there. Next Friday, the 2nd of March, join us for a special program featuring you and your privacy on the internet. With us will be Dr. Charles Jennings, founder and CEO of Portland Software and co-founder of Trust-E. That's a little e at the end. That'll be here at the MAC. More and more people are taking advantage of the City Club website, which offers access to research reports, past club program presentations, upcoming events, and membership information. The address, as I'm sure you all know by now, is www.pdxcityclub.org. Many club members have already committed to recruiting 2 new members between now and March the 31st. If any of the rest of you want to join the team, please fill out the form in the bulletin and return it to the club office as soon as you can. But if you're a guest here today and you're interested in joining, you don't need a recruiter. Just fill in one of the application forms on the table and give it to a staff member on the way out. As you may have seen in the bulletin, we'll be kicking off our second Portland seminar series in March. If you're interested, register today while there's still room. It was very popular last year and filled up rather quickly. Now to today's program. Our member host today is Carol Wetherill, member of the Board of Governors and Professor of Education at Lewis and Clark. She will ask the first question of our speaker. Following Carol's questions, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please be ready at the microphone before Carol is finished, and please identify yourself as a member of the City Club and ask your question in half a minute or less. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Kaiser Permanente Health Systems, by Wells Fargo Bank, and by Portland General Electric. We're very grateful for their support. And with that, let me introduce Larry Norvell, who is the Executive Director of United Way, who in turn will introduce Dr. Kagan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Patty. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a real honor to introduce Dr. Sharon Lynn Kagan. She's Senior Research Scientist, Yale University, the Child Study Center. Her honors and credentials would seem to be only possible for a group of people, not just one person. She's president of the National Association for Education of Young Children. She's a consultant to the White House, Congress, the National Governors Association, the Departments of Education, Health and Human Services. Listen to this, she's a member of over 40 national boards and panels. She's written over 120 publications and authored over 12 volumes. How many of you in your life have read 120 publications? Can I see a show of hands here? This lady's written 120. What is really impressive about her, in addition to those earlier credentials, is she has real-world frontline experience as a Head Start teacher and administrator, so she knows what it's like on the front line. She's been an administrator of public schools. God love you for that. She's been a director in the New York City Mayor's office. How would you like that position? I had a chance to talk with her and hear her speak yesterday evening, and 4 outstanding characteristics of this remarkable individual to stand out to me. First of all, her warmth and the genuineness is simply her. So as you get a chance to know her, you'll see what a great human being this is. She clearly has a passion that, with all the knowledge she has, doesn't get lost in her discussions with you. The passion she feels for the education of our young children. Her knowledge of our community and her understanding of the leadership our community has provided in the past towards this issue, to me, was very impressive. This is not an individual just kind of passing through Portland. She's actually been in many ways a student of the activities of Portland and has been a great champion of what has occurred here. As Oregonians, I know we take great pride in terms of our independence and our leadership, both locally and nationally. You're going to hear today a message of hope, but also as a community, there's going to be reason for us all to sit here and feel some sense of disappointment in our community. The challenge before us is we can lead the way. We've led the way before. Why can't we lead the way now? You'll hear that basically no other state in the union is providing the full range of leadership it needs against early childhood issues. You know, why can't our state and why can't Portland truly be the leaders? For us not to respond to this issue, I'll give you one quick snapshot. Over 20,000 kids over the next 4 years will start to first grade not ready to learn, unless we choose to take action and make a greater response in this community. I ask you to join United Way, Bank of America, the Multnomah Commission for Children, Families, and Communities, and other great groups in this community to wrap our arms around this significant issue, hear what's going to be said today, and let's all be about making a change. Please join me in welcoming this national treasure, Dr. Sharon Lynn Kagan.
I just said what a lovely, lovely introduction. It does capture the way I feel about Portland and about this wonderful state, and also about the issues facing us with regard to early childhood education. I do love coming to this state and this city because, perhaps more than any other, I really do believe that Oregonians have a sense of remarkable initiative, and they are remarkably invigorating. I really have accoladed over time this community's and the state's commitment to benchmarking, which you all set the national standard for. Your Oregon Commission on Children and Families was one of the first such commissions at the state and at the county level that actually is now being modeled throughout the country. And I am also continually impressed by the incredible level of partnership activities that have happened here historically, and indeed that are going on right now. I adore and want to commend the Early Childhood Initiative for all that it is doing to bring children's health, mental health, and child care together. And I also want to especially applaud United Way's Success by Six efforts. These are efforts that really we need to take national note of. In addition, your governor's children's plan gives me a great sense of optimism that we have $66 million coming into services for children birth to age 3 and slightly beyond is critically, critically important. Oregon is now not alone. You were a premier state, but now throughout the nation, there is a growing commitment to the early care and education of our youngest citizens. Of course, President George W. Bush, in all of his efforts to promote literacy, has taken us in a new step in this direction. But indeed, sitting right waiting to be signed in the United States Congress are new bills reauthorizing a slightly new direction in Title I, our largest educational entitlement to children in this country. In addition, there are 3 new pieces of legislation pending related to the care of young children. It is also not to escape us that parents of young children are dramatically concerned about the health and well-being of their youngsters. Indeed, you might be surprised to know that in this country we now have 97 different parenting magazines to advise parents with very young children. And if that weren't enough, the media has found that it is to their benefit to be popularizing issues related to young children. The largest circulation of any single Newsweek magazine, I'm told, was their issue on the brain and its development. So we see that young children are really moving to the ascent, not only in this state, but around the nation. I should say that part of this is due to the fact that we in the field of early childhood, as well as those of us who study the way governments move, are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of research to the development of public policy. And while I won't bore you with the litany of research that is germane to these issues, I would be remiss if I did not cite the wonderful studies that we now have that indeed show unequivocally that investments in the education and care of young children make a big difference in their long-term success in school. Not simply their readiness for school at age 5, but their long-term success over time. I would also be remiss if I didn't say that our research indicates that for every dollar invested for children below the age of 5 in high-quality early care and education programs, we are able to save considerable amounts of revenue. Moreover, we know that the impact of the brain research suggests that while learning does not stop at age 3, certainly what happens in the early years before the beginning of school is definitely brain setting for children's long-term development. All of this is by way of prelude. It is the good news part of the story. There is another side, as Larry has suggested, and I would like to begin to turn to that. Indeed, the research has also showed us that we are not doing the very best job on behalf of young children that we possibly could. In fact, recent studies about the quality of early care and education services suggest, and I would ask you to hold on to your seats on this one, that if we looked at the average condition of child care and early education across our country, we would find that only 16% of the centers in the United States indeed are offering services that are of high quality. Now, what do I mean by high quality? I don't mean the kind of quality that should be out of the reach of all of us. I mean the kind of quality that you and I would select for our own children or our own grandchildren. Indeed, 86% of the quality of services in this country is below the threshold of what is acceptable. And if the situation is bad for all children birth to age 5, if we look at infants and toddlers, children from 0 to 3, fully 40% of youngsters who are in out-of-home care, an increasing number, are in care that actually jeopardizes their physical well-being. What do I mean by that? This means centers where there is broken glass on the floor. This means playgrounds that don't have the right kind of equipment. It means caregivers who are not attending to the basic health needs of youngsters. The point of all of this is to say that there seems to be a paradox. There is growing interest. There is a tremendous amount of activity that is taking place. And yet, at the same time, despite an upward edge of investment, there is a downward edge of quality. What is needed to redress this space in between, then, is the question that I think we all really owe the next generation, as well as ourselves, to address. Let me suggest that the answer to this big gap lies in really two things. It's very simple. The first is understanding that children, today's children, live in a very different social context than even the children of a decade or two ago. The second issue is to understand that as an early care and education field and as a community of concerned adults, we have not done the rigorous kind of long-term planning that is really necessary if we're going to change the nature and quality of these services. Let me elaborate on the first. So what's really different about young children now? Well, first of all, what's different is they're living in families that look very, very different than families of the past era. It's not simply that more women are working outside the home, which we know is a demographic phenomenon that has increased dramatically since the 1960s. It is, however, that parents do not have the time to spend with their children. We all hear about quality time, and really some of us think that that is an excuse for not quantity time. The reality is that parents are beginning to be very concerned about the way they are managing their own lives. They are increasingly stressed, they are increasingly burdened, and the media has given them good cause because, after all, we're bombarding them with information that says these are the important years, and at the same time, they cannot be with their children. The dilemma is very clear. The other side of the coin is what's happening to children themselves, and this actually concerns me dramatically. I would suggest to you that in this great country, the nature of childhood has really changed dramatically. Children don't have the right to really be children anymore. Think of children that you know. I would bet more often than not that they are maturing at rates that are quite amazing. We have 8- and 9-year-old little girls who are behaving as though they are young women. Indeed, one has to look at images of children. You know, in the old days it was Shirley Temple. Now, unfortunately, it's Jean-Benet Ramsey and issues of that ilk. Once we regarded sex and violence and depression and drugs as issues that were associated with adolescence. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality is those are issues that are associated with very, very young children. Young kids today are being forced to make sense of a very complex, complicated world. Their parents try to help, but these are challenges that really pose huge problems. So if we acknowledge that we are living in a changing context, not to mention the advent of technology and what that does, we also need to be brutally honest that what has worked in the past, because children are different, because the social context is different, really won't work in the future. In the past, it has sufficed to generate a new program with every legislative session. So indeed, if you scan this country, we have our Smart Starts, our Early Starts, our Head Starts, our Bright Beginnings, our Future. Notice how they all seem to have 2 words, and they all seem to create a sort of a note of optimism. This I would call the program approach to improving services for young children. And yes, it's good, but it is not good enough, and it does not address the needs of tomorrow's youngsters. What indeed do we need to do? I would suggest that every single state, and several have already done this in this nation, needs to begin to vision far beyond one legislative session or one term or even 2 terms of a governor. What indeed we need are plans that transcend a decade or 2, 20 or 30-year plans. You may recall that the master plan for education in the state of California was actually a 40-year plan. And it is the plan that brought about the construction and structure of the entire community college system in the state of California, reputed to be among the best in our nation, if not the best in our world. I would suggest, and now California is embarking on this, that every state needs to have a master plan for what it is going to do for the care and education of its young children. We cannot afford to do this helter-skelter any longer. We had a master plan for education, K-12 in this nation. We have a master plan for higher education. If we know the early years are important, we should focus our energies there. What would the architecture be of such a master plan? I look at our architect. Every good architect knows that you have to begin with a structure, and I would like to provide some elements. I'm suggesting these predicated on a major national study. You don't have to accept them, but I think it will give you a sense that we need to begin to attack this robustly and comprehensively. I'm going to suggest 8 domains where we need activity, and I'm going to give you an equation that you might not be familiar with. It's 8 minus 1 equals 0. Now, I know that doesn't add up. But what do I mean by that? I mean that if you take away any single element of this, you will not have a comprehensive plan for young children. It cannot work unless all elements are there. So let me begin. Element number one, program quality. It's at the beginning because the research is very clear that we do not have it. What do I mean by program quality? I mean having places where children can go at their parents' choice, and I believe in a free choice system, so that parents can choose among high-quality family child care or high-quality center-based care. Those environments must first support children's healthy development. If children are not healthy physically, then indeed they will not learn. And so efforts like we see embarked upon in your community to bridge the gap between children's health and mental health and early childhood are critically important. Other elements of quality include a focus on literacy. Yes, it is important that we maximize these early years of development. It is, however, to be enjoined by other domains that are very important for very young children. Let me suggest that the National Education Goals Panel has identified 5 domains of readiness, and I believe that every quality program must address all 5. I've alluded to one, physical health and motor development. The second is children's social and emotional development. The third is a category called approaches toward learning, and I'm going to come back to it in a minute. It is what teachers feel is most important, most important. The fourth category is language and communication skills, and the fifth is cognition and general knowledge. Now, a long time ago, a decade ago, when I would work with governors and I would say, so what do you think, Governor, is readiness? And they would say, oh, I know, it's easy. It's tying a shoe and counting to 10. That is a part of readiness, to be sure, but it is not the most important part because all children learn how to do those things. The most important part of readiness, according to teachers by poll, suggests that what we call approaches toward learning is at the core of early childhood education. It is promoting children's curiosity, their willingness to experiment, their inventiveness, their motivation, their task persistence. And I bet if you asked any kindergarten teacher, she would say, I don't care if Johnny comes to me knowing all of his letters of the alphabet. What I care about is that he is ready to learn in terms of persisting at a task, in terms of being turned on to learning. This is the joy and the vibrancy of early childhood education. Literacy is important, but not at the expense of addressing these other dimensions. High-quality early care and education programs address all 5 dimensions equally. The second element of the system, a focus on results. For a very long time, we in early childhood education have said that the quality of an early childhood program is based on the quality of the setting. We want children to be in settings that are conducive to their learning. I would submit that that is critically important. But now it is time for us to really take a good hard look at what young children know and what they are able to do. I strongly support a results-driven system. That does not mean testing on standardized tests children below 3rd grade. It does mean having very clear ideas that are specified of what we want children to know and be able to do in those 5 dimensions that I just cited, and to engage in periodic assessment and to retailer programs to accommodate children's needs. But we need to be conscious of results. We can no longer afford to have programs that meander willy-nilly and are not highly intentional about children's development. The third element, the third structure, is to have robust programs of family engagement and parent support. This is not new to early care and education. Indeed, family support has been part of our field for a very long time. What is new is that our parents are not the same today as they were in days of yore. They don't have time to volunteer at school and bake all the cookies. We need to find new ways to engage parents in ways that will be meaningful for them. Indeed, we also need to increase the family friendliness of workplaces, and I know that we have wonderful business contributions here in terms of what Bank of America has done in terms of contributing money. That is critically important, and we need that support. In addition, we need all workplaces to examine their family policies. We also need to make sure that parents have the knowledge to be effective consumers of early care and education programs. Oftentimes they are so busy they choose the first program they visit, and it may not be well suited to the needs of their individual child. So parent engagement and understanding is the third rung. The fourth, individual licensing. You may not be aware, but the vast majority of people who work with young children under the age of 5 do not hold degrees that certify them to teach with young children. Indeed, many throughout this nation don't even have high school diplomas. It is a very odd paradox. We're placing children at their most vulnerable ages with individuals who are the least well-trained. If education is indeed important, then it must be important to those who work with young children as well. The fifth recommendation is that we must pay more attention to how we train people to work with young children. I would submit to you that much of the content of early care and education training indeed is vested in a 1950s approach to curriculum. It doesn't take into consideration, as robustly as it should, the multiculturalism of our nation, the need for teachers to be able to be effective users and consumers and judges of what is technology appropriate, and it doesn't take into consideration the growing numbers of infants and toddlers who find themselves in out-of-home care. We need to gin up the quality of our teacher training curriculum dramatically. The sixth element is program licensing. I bet that many of you would be surprised to know that in the state that I live in, Connecticut, 50% of all of the programs that serve young children are legally exempt from regulation. Who are these programs? They are programs that serve children for 2.5 hours or less. We have a lot of programs in Connecticut that run for 2 hours and 29 minutes. It's true. They are programs that are in churches and programs that are in public schools. Now, every state does this regulation a little bit differently. But if you take a look across the nation, virtually 50% of the children are in programs that are legally exempt from regulation. I know we're in an anti-regulatory climate, but I would ask you two questions. How many of you would ride in an airplane if 50% of the airplanes, and you didn't know which 50%, were not regulated by the FAA? Would you? No. How many of you would ride in elevators if 50% of them didn't have that little certificate that said inspected by the state? I think our children deserve as much attention and as much regulation as elevators and airplanes. The next element has to be a system of funding and financing. Let me suggest to you that early care and education is one of the most underfinanced industries in the United States. Indeed, in the state that I live in, we spend $8,700 per child of public dollars for children ages 5 and older. What do you think we spend in public dollars for children 4 and younger? Anybody want to guess? A tenth. That's a good guess. Anybody else want to guess? Thank you for venturing forth. Anybody else want to guess? Come on. All right, I'll tell you. 100th of that. We spend $87 for every child under age 4 and under, and $8,700 for every child age 5 and over. Let me say to you that's a gross disparity in our state because we do have very good teacher salaries, but I would venture that in every single state in the union, a very wide disparity in our investment in young children takes place. All of this is by way of saying, and I'm not advancing that we need to have a public school system for children under the age of 5. I am saying that our investments those investments from the public sector, from the business sector, and from parents do need to increase if we ever expect to have high-quality early care and education. The final piece of structure is, I believe very strongly, that we need to have a governance plan, a way that all of these disparate programs can come together. I'm not suggesting that they all have to be labeled Head Start or Bright Tomorrows or Early Futures. I am suggesting that there are cost efficiencies that can be achieved if programs come together to collaborate. Things that other communities are doing include the development of citywide substitute pools, the development of transportation systems, the development of joint training across the various programs that serve young children. All of this, I should say, is actually happening. That's the good news. There are pieces of this going on in every single state in the Union. The dilemma is that in no state in the Union are all 8 pieces happening. And it is true that until we have a concerted effort to make headway in each of these 8 domains, these will remain a set of ideas to ponder, not a set of actions that will engender a deeply improved system. It is also important to note that unlike any time in our national history, the nation's eyes are on its young children. And if we are going to move, we have a choice. We can move in the old way and create more isolated programs, or we can elect to move in a comprehensive way that will create the kind of system that will assure in perpetuity high-quality early care and education for this nation. I would like to actually close with a very brief story about my son that I think you will find germane to my comments. When my son was 7, like most 7-year-olds, he actually asked incessant numbers of questions, totally incessant. He would ask, how many stars are there in the sky? The kinds of questions you couldn't answer. How many grains of sand are there on a sandy beach? And he always perplexed me. But one day, I felt wonderful because he asked me the question, Mom, how many seconds are there in a year? And I said, this one I can figure out. I know that there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour and so on. And so I began to calculate, and he saw me calculating. And he stopped me, and he said, stop, you're wrong. I said, I'm wrong? How can I be wrong? He said, you're just wrong. There are really only 12 seconds in a year. There is January 2nd and February 2nd and March 2nd. I share that with you because it represents what the joy of children and childhood really is, and what it is our obligation to preserve. I also share it with you because Peter and I had very, very different perspectives on the word second, and I thank you very much for inviting me to share my perspectives on early care and education. And the third reason I share that is because I truly believe that we as adults have not got a single second to waste if we want to improve the care and education of America's young children. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for an important and highly provocative talk as well. The question that keeps coming up for me as I think about what I consider to be something of a crisis in the care and education of children under 5 is this one. What effect do the conditions of poverty, violence, and the disintegration of the economic infrastructure of many neighborhoods and communities have on young children's development? And how should we keep our attention focused on these rather than putting them into the background as we look at ways to support our communities and families and their children?
That's a great question. It's a wonderful question, very thoughtful, and I thank you for it. I did focus in my prepared comments around the development of an early care and education system because I feel that it is not attended to sufficiently. It is true that such a system must sit within the context of communities that care about their children. It is going to be very, very, very difficult, even if we created the most perfect early care and education system, which we do need to do, to help eradicate systems of poverty, systems of violence, all of which indeed permeate what happens to young children. Children are not immune. They are very astute. And young children, if they love to do one thing, what they love to do is to model adult behavior. That's the good news, because if they're exposed to good models, it's wonderful. I will share with you that increasingly as I go around to early care and education centers, what I see is children who used to build beautiful buildings with blocks end up now contorting those blocks into make-believe guns. I will say to you that I also see children, quote, playing house and demonstrating in their, quote, play, very aggressive behavior and also very explicit sexual behavior. So children do model what they see, and as a result, to think that they will become immune to lives that are touched by violence is totally erroneous. It calls for us to embark on comprehensive community initiatives, like I know those that are underway under the auspices of United Way, so that we think long-term not only about the establishment of an early care and education system, but about the establishment of efforts to prevent community violence and to build community cohesion. I hope that responds. Thank you. Should I take questions, or how do we want to do this?
Let's do that. Apparently the challenge that's been set to you is silence the audience. I think this is unknown, but we do have one.
Tom Deering, City Club member. You alluded to the fact that education, or that learning doesn't stop, or intellectual growth doesn't stop at age 3. There was a time not too long ago when there was a mantra among early education people that if you don't get them before 3, you've lost them. And I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that concept and sort of reassure that no matter how important it is and that you get them as young as you can, that it's important and valuable and useful to develop intellectual growth after those early ages.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful question. You know, sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for. For many years, we in early childhood education just wished that people would pay more attention to us and would really begin to understand the importance of the field. And indeed, along came members from Hollywood, and along came some neuroscientists who were doing very important brain research, and poof, what we had was a tremendous amount of emphasis in our field about the importance of the early development of the brain. I would venture to say to you that not much of this research was very new. Not much of this research actually pointed solely toward the importance of the early years, and indeed, not much of this research was totally 100% supported by early childhood educators. Ask anybody who works with young children and they will tell you that all learning doesn't stop at age 3. What ended up happening, however, was that because this research became so popularized, it was picked up by the media and by the press, and indeed was in some cases actually erroneously reported. Indeed, John Brewer, a president of one of the most foremost foundations in our nation, wrote a book called The Myth of the First 3 Years. Having said all of that, let me say to you that it is very clear that a lot happens in our brains, synapses are formed, and that these years are crucial. And it is important that during these years, children's health, and I want to go back to that point, their mental health as well as their education are provided for. By no means, however, does learning stop at age 3. Indeed, it is an ongoing process, and clearly, the years of 4 and 5 are equally important. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Jeff Bowley, Early Childhood Institute.
Hi.
Hi. What I'd like to know is, to what extent can we learn from other major industrialized societies?
Good.
Who is doing, in your opinion, the best job of early childhood um, programs, if you will, and what are the elements of what they're doing that we could model? Thank you.
Okay. This is a very important question, and it's going to take me, to do it well, it would probably take me a week to answer. I'm going to try and do it, I'm going to try and skim it. I spend a lot of time in nations across this world, and I get to evaluate programs that are going on. And I can tell you that there is no one perfect nation. There are nations that are doing it well, and I will share those in a moment. But basically, what needs to be remembered is that in every nation that is doing a good job, they have a concept of what childhood is. And I will give you some very concrete examples in a moment. And that they create their early childhood programs to match that concept. And so one could say the best countries are those where they have a philosophy, they socially construct a meaning to childhood, and then they plan their programs accordingly. Let me give you one concrete example, Sweden. And this is true to a lesser extent of the other Scandinavian countries. The Swedes truly believe in the autonomy of the individual child. They truly believe in gender equity. They truly believe in a commitment to the out of doors. And every one of their curricula, by the way, there is a national curricula, there is no such thing here, reverberates this passion. As a result, when you go into Swedish schools, preschools, you will never see the kind of didactic focus on literacy that is being propagated now. Parenthetically, I should say that if you look at the Third International Test of Reading and Math and Science, the TIMSS report year after year, which country of 42 countries scores the highest on reading and math in 4th, 8th, and 12th grade? Sweden scores very, very, very high. They will not permit instruction of reading until age 7. What they believe is that children must be children. And so they have programs matching their national identity. They have programs, I visited one in the middle of winter, where children do not go inside all day. In northern Sweden. We would think this is crazy. We would never do that. But that matches their national history. They do programs that foster gender equity in a way that we absolutely would never, never condone in this nation. All this is by way of saying that what a country values, and in a way, if you want to know a country's values, all you have to do is take a look at what is going on in their early childhood programs. I'm going to give you one more quick example. France. Many people countenance that the France system of early childhood is the supreme in the country. And I would say that it is very, very good for the French. There is a national curriculum, and I will share with you a vignette. I spent a lot of time in the French preschools. One lesson had, there are early childhood educators in the room. Raise your hand. Okay, now when I say this, I want you all to just look at what these people do when I say this. They had children sitting in groups of 10 at tables, and on each table there was a different postcard of a French master, Monet, Manet. The children, age 4, were instructed to copy as closely as they could this French master. Now look at the early childhood education. What do you think? Is this good? Would we regard this as good pedagogy? No. But do the French think it was good? Yes, because one of their goals is to promote a very strong sense of, that was not an art lesson. That was not a lesson about creativity. That was a lesson about nationalism. They hold that value very, very dear. Those weren't Spanish painters. Those postcards were very well selected. All of this is all that I'm saying is that for the French, the system works very, very well. The dilemma in America, ladies and gentlemen, is that we don't really have a codified social construction of how we hold childhood. And indeed, I would submit that until we do, it's going to be very difficult for us to construct such a system. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Diane Lynn. I serve on the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners, and in this case, following the lead of my able colleagues, Lisa Nato, in the area of early childhood development. Thank you for your message of basically honoring our children better than we do. I have a very specific question. Do you know of states or places that have developed funding or taxation structures that can help change the tide of our investment and help us reach a tipping point that moves the resources in the right direction?
Yes, it's an excellent question and at the core of this. The answer is that we have got in this country, and actually if you come up to me after, I can give you the name of a resource that chronicles this. We have got examples in virtually every state in the Union of efforts to increase the dollars that are coming into early care and education through a variety of strategies. In some places, we have tax strategies, an additional 1% increase on the sales tax with the money reverting back. In other places, we have some voluntary payroll tax deductions that are in place. We have community taxes, much like the art tax that exists in some communities. So we are working. What we don't have is an entire state that has done this, and we don't have by any means a national policy. But it is very clear that we are looking at the financing of early care and education, much like we are looking at the financing of higher education. Let me take a moment on this. You all know that in higher education, it is a combined approach to financing. Think about your own college education or that of your children or that of your friends. Part of that is paid by tuition, right? Part of those costs are also absorbed by the state if you are in a state system, and those contributions tend to be large and oftentimes larger than the actual tuition that is paid by parents. In addition, if a student decides to take out a loan, a government loan, of which there are many, that is an additional form of subsidization. In addition, so the point is that we are now beginning to look at higher education as a way to begin to fund early care and education that will create a variety of structures and incentives so that it will be funded in new and inventive ways. There is no question more money is needed in the system. And if you come to me after, I'll give you the citation. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Dr. Kagan, I got some questions from the floor. This one is, could you compare and contrast half-time with full-time kindergarten?
Yes. Thank you. A very, very critical question. In this country, when we began kindergartens, which, as you know, was a state-by-state, county-by-county, district-by-district add-on to the regular program, they began as only half-day programs. Increasingly, with the advent of mothers' employment in the workforce, programs that were half-day are becoming full-day. The difference between the two is actually quite large because you cannot just take two half-day programs and clump them together. You really do need to respect children's developmental needs. And so in a full-day program, there are issues of pacing. There are issues of allowing more time for child-initiated activities. I want to underscore that word child-initiated, to give children free choice. There is also time for more formal instruction, and there is also time for children to interact with one another. So that the full-day program, and by the way, full day is actually a bit of a misnomer because programs tend to run not full day in terms of what working parents need, which is until 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Full day programs often that are under the aegis of public schools run from 7:30 or 8 in the morning until 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, which still leaves parents in the bind of having to figure out what they're going to do with their children in the afternoon. Often those children go then into after-school programs, sometimes at the school site and sometimes off-site, so that kids are being bounced around a whole lot. But I think as a field we have mastered how you really can create a very high-quality program for children in a full-day setting. Yes, sir.
You certainly came to Oregon at a good time. My name is Monroe Sweetland. I'm a member of the Education Committee of the City Club, and was many years ago chairman of the Senate Education Committee at Salem. Have you had a chance, has anybody shown you the speech given in this room 2 weeks ago by the governor of Oregon, one of the greatest pitches I ever heard, and these were wonderful statements. Are you in contact with him in any way?
I have not been in contact directly with your governor, but the people who have invited me have graciously shared with me the key points of the governor's plan,
Good.
and I do endorse that dramatically.
I hope we have copies enough for those that are interested to read it.
I'm told that they are on the table in the back there.
A limited number unless it's more supply available. But I hope everybody who's serious in following up on this will read his passionate speech and fit it in with what you're telling us today. Do you have much political support around the country? How does it look in the various states?
I actually think we've got more political support than we ever have, and I am very optimistic, and people who have worked in the field of early childhood really do need to be applauded for their incredible efforts. So I am very optimistic. What I am scared about is that we will not use this opportunity to create a full system, and that we will be content to add on only more services to the system. Let me take a moment and explain why that is so important. I would ask you to pretend that you were a gardener and that you were planting a beautiful bed of roses over here. That would be one set of programs. And then a member of the legislature would come over and say, we want to create another set of programs over here. And so you'd have kind of a patch of gardenias, and then another set of programs over here. And all of a sudden, what you've got are lots of beautiful pieces of a garden. But you know what? All those seeds are drawing from the same soil. And that soil is not being nourished. And when you overplant soil and you don't nourish it, what happens? Those flowers die. What I'm saying to you is, investing only in programs is like planting another patch of flowers. We've got to attend to the soil. And the soil of early childhood education are the issues I've talked about. Teacher training and compensation, good systems of regulation, good systems of governance. And so my plea is that it's not just another patch of flowers, but that we recognize, you know the biggest dilemma in the field today, sir? It's that we're launching more programs, but we can't even get staff to work in them because the salaries and the compensation is so low. So somehow putting up more programs where we're going to need more staff will only add to the confusion unless we nourish the infrastructure or the soil.
What are your comments on faith-based?
Good. I believe that in this country we need a diversity of programs for children. And I do believe that many parents elect to choose faith-based organizations and to inculcate their religious beliefs very early on, and I fully support that. What I do not support is that simply because programs are faith-based, that they can obviate their responsibility to high-quality early care and education. I think you have to do both simultaneously. It's totally possible. But that you cannot have really only faith-based with no investment in quality.
My name is David Drake, and I'm a new City Club member. I've spent most of the last 2 years working with leaders in the state of Oregon around looking at a systems approach to early childhood. And I wanted to get your comment on two paradoxes. I'm also doing my PhD research on this, so it's very helpful to me. But because I'm not finding a lot of resources yet, but there's sort of two fundamental paradoxes that we keep stumbling over. One is that most of the people providing services are attempting to provide strength-based approaches, but they work in deficit-based models. So people are categorized and or funded and or counted based on deficit, whether it's income, handicap, whatever it is. So that's one paradox, is how to match those two realities together. The other is that most of the programs operate in silos. Yep. They have their own politics, they have their own funding, and even the governor's plan, which I support, has its own sort of intrigue of politics around it. So there's that one world that the people who provide services have to live and account for that world. But then you go out in the community and almost everything happens on the basis of informal networks, most of which doesn't even show up on paper, but allows extraordinary things to get done on behalf of children. Yes. So I would like to get some of your thoughts on those sort of two paradoxes about early childhood.
Good. There are excellent questions right at the core of where I spend my life. The issue about strengths-based philosophy but deficit-based practice is absolutely accurate, and it is one of the large conundrums in the field. I don't think we will get out of this until we make early care and education universally available at parental choice. At parental choice. And it is why you are seeing states now, like the state of Georgia, like the state of New York, really moving toward adopting universal approaches so that all children will be served. And I do believe that the other issue is that is ancillary to what you are suggesting, is that the funding streams and the silos have really served to act in exact contradiction to what our national philosophy is about integrating children. What really ends up happening is that early care and education serves de facto, not de jure, but de facto, to segregate young children, so that within the column called Head Start, we have really segregated low-income children. Now, there is a provision in Head Start to use 10% for over-income, but when you got so many children on the waiting list who are low-income, the inclination is to serve that population. So I do believe that once we move toward greater universality, we will then provide options for all children and all individuals. I also believe that it is too late in the day in this country to fully tear down all of those silos. Would that it were. I think that we are going to operate in categorical funding. That's the way our Congress is. That's the way our state legislatures are. And that is why I so strongly and passionately support what Oregon is doing in terms of its commissions on children and families and the development of some sort of a governance structure that would transcend that. Let programs maintain their identity. Let's always preserve a Head Start program in this country. But in the domains where it makes sense to collaborate, let's figure out ways to do so. I hope that answers your question. I think there's time for one more question.
My name is Hadim Chisti, and I'm a club member and also part of the Education Human Development Committee. And I work in early childhood as well as the Community and Family Service Center here in the county. Multnomah County has been very, I think, ahead of the times in their early childhood programming through the Parent-Child Development Services. It's been universal. As we're moving into the governor's picture of things, it's going to those children with higher risk or the greatest risk. And all children are at risk, I see. And also, I want you to address the necessity in that universal model to bring in children that have developmental disabilities and physical disabilities so that they don't get somehow just left out and segregated somewhere else.
Okay, good questions. When I speak about all children, I really do mean all. And all means not just children who are financially or economically at risk, but children who may be at risk because of not speaking America's mainstream language, children who may be at risk because of a physical or emotional disabling condition. I will say to you that the tension that you feel between serving all children and serving those most at risk is a very hard one. And it's actually the question that legislators and governors ask me the most. How should we reconcile this? My response is, if indeed we were a nation committed to the well-being of children, we wouldn't face this dilemma, because automatically we would be serving all children according to their need. That's the message.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kagan. You've certainly thrown down the gauntlet to the state to do something about all of this. Before we adjourn, there are two things I need to do. One, I draw your attention to the pink papers on the table. They highlight upcoming City Club Friday programs and committee programs which relate to education and to childhood. And the second thing, I omitted to recognize new members who are here today. If you'd like to rise so you can be seen, that would be appreciated. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.